Hey, today I want to build on my Excel filter part 1 video by adding a second externally managed table of data. I've run into this situation with multi-tab financial workbooks where a portion of the data can or must be entered manually, and where there are some data sources that can be fed into the workbook by way of Excel's PowerQuery tool. Now, full disclosure, this video title might be a little misleading because I'm going to use a combination of the filter function and the VSTACK function to vertically stack multiple items into a dynamic array. For this video, I'll briefly touch on my PowerQuery connection. And similar to part 1, the goal here is to demonstrate methods to streamline internal data flows in your workbook. And this may not fit your exact situation, but I'm hoping this video generates some good ideas. So here I have a sample workbook I've created, and just like in part 1, it has several project tabs: Project 1, Project 2, and Project 3. And now it also has a couple of data tabs. One of these is the raw data tab with a name table that I covered last time. This is where raw data is manually entered for each project cost, and then by way of the filter function, that data is also fed into each project tab. For example, as we look at Project 3, you can see the filter function is feeding this data into Project 3's itemized table. What's new in this example is the PowerQuery workbook, which contains another name table that holds data which was brought in via PowerQuery from a Dataverse table. In this scenario, this data is also cost data, but it's cost info that's of a different category and entered by a different person. So you might ask, why would this situation occur? Well, say I have a subcontractor that I need info from. I may not want them to have direct access to this Excel file because I don't want them to accidentally alter it, or maybe I don't want them to see my financial data. Instead, I've set up a method for them to input data into a Dataverse table that I can then tap into with PowerQuery. Note that even though I'm using Dataverse for this example, you could use this approach for a variety of other sources. For those not familiar, if I click on the Data tab of the ribbon, and then the Queries and Connections button, you can see the pane open up for queries and connections. If I wanted to open up the query in detail and edit it, I could double click this connection and that would launch the PowerQuery editor. So for now, I will close out of this pane. And before we move on, I want to highlight a couple things about my table. So first, it is named DV_table, and that'll be important when I'm referencing this information later. Also, this table is formatted identically to the itemized tables in each project spreadsheet in terms of the number of columns, their names, and their order. And lastly, notice that there's only one line item in this table, and it is not tied to Project 1, where we'll head next. In Project 1, I've already entered in a combination of the VSTACK function with two nested filter functions. Basically what is happening here is I'm vertically stacking two filtered dynamic arrays that contain itemized cost data for Project 1. The first stacked array comes from the raw data table that lives in this workbook, and the second is the table pulled from Dataverse by PowerQuery. At the moment, this table only includes matches from the raw data table. Notice in my filter functions this time, I've used that third optional argument, if empty. I've asked the formula to return no Dataverse matches for my second array, if empty, and that's exactly what's showing. Also note, to prevent any NA values from causing issues with my expenditure formulas, I've also nested my VSTACK function with an if NA function. I do want to caution that when using filter inside of VSTACK, I've had issues when I did not use that third argument. In those instances, even though I knew that there was data to be pulled, when I did not use if empty, I would get blank cells with no error message. So it would not have been obvious that there was an error. So I would recommend using the if empty argument anytime you're stacking. Now at this point, we have the combination of VSTACK and filter functions all set. So let's go back to the PowerQuery sheet. And now I'm going to go up to the data tab of the ribbon, and I'm going to refresh all to refresh my Dataverse table. And because this is a pretty small query, it should run pretty quickly. So now you see that there is a second line item now for project 1. So I'm going to go back over to project 1 now, and you can see that the placeholder for if empty, the text is no longer there. But instead we see that line item that appeared in the Dataverse table that we just refreshed. So at this point, we vertically stacked dynamic arrays. Similar to my last video, I want to point out that you can use these filter dropdowns to filter the data, but you cannot sort the array. Also, keep in mind that these two arrays will always be stacked in this order. So this is another reason why the if empty argument is helpful. Imagine you had several data sources vertically stacked. If you intuitively name the if empty text, you will be able to quickly identify which tables did not have matches. So that wraps it up for this video. Again, I hope this sparks some ideas on how you can use Excel's dynamic array functions like filter and VSTACK to streamline your reporting. I'll include links to Microsoft's documentation below, and feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or by email if you want more info. Thanks.